This is The Long Road to Publishing, the podcast where we hear from authors who have traveled a long and bumpy road to publishing their books. Whether you're just starting out on your own writing and publishing journey, or if you're all too aware of the many possible detours along the way, this podcast is for you. I'm your host, Eva Langston, author, writing instructor, and creator of Eva's newsletter for writers on Substack. Thank you so much for coming along on the ride. I am so excited to bring you today's episode with New York Times bestselling author Julia Bartz. I absolutely loved her debut novel, The Writing Retreat, as well as her latest novel, The Last Session. And it was so great to hear her full journey from her first attempt at writing a novel, to parting ways with her first agent, to overcoming her fear of public speaking in preparation for her book launch. Before we dive in, I just want to remind you that this is a brand new podcast I'm trying very hard to get off the ground. Please, please, please consider subscribing, telling your friends to subscribe, and if you feel so inclined, take a moment to give The Long Road to Publishing a 5-star rating or review, because that helps other people find the podcast. But no matter what you do, thank you so much for listening. It really means a lot to me. Now, on with the show. I'm calling this episode From Feeling Like a Failure to New York Times Bestseller. Julia Bartz is the New York Times bestselling author of The Last Session and The Writing Retreat, as well as a practicing therapist and a creative coach. Her fiction writing has appeared in the South Dakota Review, in Digest Magazine, and more. She lives in Brooklyn. Connect with her on social media at Julia Bartz. So welcome, Julia, to The Long Road to Publishing.
Thank you, Eva. I'm so happy to be here.
I am so happy you're here. And I did warn you that I was going to just gush a little bit because I don't remember how I found out about The Writing Retreat, but it was just one of those novels that as soon as I read the description, I was like, oh, yes, this is for me. And then I literally could not put it down. I think I stayed up until like 3 a.m. reading it. It was so good. And then with The Last Session, which I just recently read, I remember I was having trouble sleeping again. And I was like, oh, good. I'm glad I'm having trouble sleeping. I'll just keep reading Julia's book. That's how good it was. Like, it made me happy that I couldn't sleep so I could have more time to read.
Yeah, I'm sorry about the insomnia, but I'm glad you like the book.
Yeah. Oh, they were just both so much fun. I feel like you're becoming one of those authors that when you have a new book, I'm just going to drop everything to go read it because they're just super propulsive and a little crazy and fun. Anyway, I definitely want to get into your whole publishing journey, but I do want to give you a chance to talk about The Last Session because it just came out in April. For those people who haven't read it, can you give a little quick description?
Absolutely. So The Last Session is about a social worker named Thea who works at a psychiatric unit. And she's surprised when one day a new patient comes in who is not only her doppelganger, but also seems to have some strange ties to her past. When the patient disappears, Thea decides to try to figure out what happened to her, and she tracks her down to this wellness center in the middle of the desert in southwestern New Mexico. And the center is run by a charismatic couple who basically promises that anyone who comes to them will find their soulmate within, a short period of time after that. So Thea signs up for one of the retreats and goes, and actually, she's going to these healing sessions and feels like they're actually helping her in some ways, but then quickly realizes that something much darker is happening underneath the surface, and that if she's not careful, she might not make it out of the last session alive.
Are your books considered thrillers, or what's the official, is it psychological suspense or thriller?
That's a good question. I never know the answer to these questions. I think it's psychological thriller, maybe is the best way to describe it.
Okay. And I feel like The Writing Retreat had just a twinge of horror too. So I was curious if you have some official party line about your genre, but I guess it's good to know that it's sort of a mashup.
Yes, I think in The Last Session too, I tried to add a little bit of other elements. There's a little bit of horror. There's actually even a little bit of sci-fi. So I find that interesting too, to mix genres.
Yeah, both books, high five to you. They were great, and I hope everybody goes and reads them. But I do want to go back to the beginning because I know you kind of had a long journey to get where you are now. And I know a lot of writers say, oh, I've been writing since I was a kid, or I've always wanted to be a writer. But when did you feel like you really got serious about, okay, I'm going to write a book and try to get it published?
Yeah, so I was one of those kids who was like writing all the time, and I was writing stories and short novels, novellas, I guess, in school and high school. I think I got more serious about it in college. I went to UW-Madison, and I was able to take a class with Lori Moore, which
Oh,
was very
cool.
exciting. Yeah. So I think seeing her as an author and just seeing other people who had become authors in that program, I started to think like, oh, this is something. Maybe I can try this. Maybe I can do this. My thesis was a book of short stories. But then after college, I decided, okay, I'm going to write a novel, something more novel-like. And since I'm not confident about writing a novel yet, I'm going to make it a novel in stories, which I think a lot of people turn to that as kind of a nice transition. And so I started working on that pretty much right after college and worked on that for the next few years.
So, did you get an undergraduate degree in English or in creative writing?
Yes, I got a double major in creative writing and journalism.
Oh, okay. Okay. And so then you wrote this book of short stories, kind of linked maybe, and then did you try to do anything with it, or were you just like, okay, moving on?
I did the whole agent process, so I was blind querying people. Yeah, I mean that process is so crazy. I'm sure you know what it's like. So I got some responses and I got some requests for the manuscript, but nothing really happened with it. So at a certain point, I decided like, okay, like a lot of people write a first book that doesn't get published, so I'm just gonna move on to the next one and see what happens.
Hmm. And were you also working, doing any journalism at that time? Because you said you got a degree in journalism.
I was working in publishing. I was actually working in medical publishing. I moved to Philly right after school with a friend, and that's kind of the center of medical publishing. I don't know why. I was working as, I think I was an assistant editor there, so working with a lot of doctors. And then I was also writing for some local outlets, doing more like cultural reporting, and then also working on the book and trying to get an agent for it.
Okay. Well, so then after your short stories, you tried to write a novel, I'm guessing. And then did you query that one? And I guess tell me how you got your first agent and how many manuscripts it took to get your first agent.
My God, it was a lot, many drafts. And it's funny because that novel was speculative fiction that has since come true, unfortunately. That
Ugh.
Roe versus Wade was overturned
Hmm.
book by a fetal rights amendment and kind of the fallout of that. And then there was this resulting movement that came up with young women called Femme Fury. And so, there was a lot of scary political things happening back then at that point, too. So it felt very cathartic to write that. But yeah, it was definitely a process. And I don't even know how many versions of that were written, dozens, if not more. And I did start querying, and you'll have to forgive me, like my sense of time, I feel like has been a little messed up. But I was in Philly for 2 years and then I moved to New York. So I think this was happening in the early New York years. Initially, I was not able to get an agent. And again, there were some people who were kind of checking in and asking to see it, but it wasn't, they had some issues with it. And at that point, I hired an editor to edit the book to kind of let me know like what he was seeing. That was really helpful, and I almost consider that like my MFA experience a little bit.
Interesting. Was he doing kind of a more developmental edits of like big picture?
Yes, it was, well, kind of a combination of both. Like it was big picture, but it was also smaller things. But then he basically told me that the last third was not working and that I would have to rewrite the entire last section of it, which I agreed with. So that was helpful. That was, I think, a little hard to do because I didn't know other people who were doing that. I
Mm,
know that it's much more common, and I think sometimes people maybe don't share it or I don't know, just doesn't come up sometimes. But I did find that really helpful. And he used to be an editor at one of the big publishers. I don't remember which one. And so I did rewrite the last third and, edited it more and then started going. back to agents. I think what I did is anyone who had showed any interest, I kind of followed up and let them know that I had changed a lot and, would love to send it to them if they were interested. And this went on for a long time. Like this is a span of like a good number of years.
Yeah, yeah.
And also like the querying process can be very slow sometimes. So I think that's important to share too, that even if someone asks to see manuscript, they could, potentially not get back to you for months, if not even a little longer than that. Depending on the situation, if you have an offer, they'll get to it a lot faster. But I was waiting on that, and then one agent wanted to have a conversation with me, so we met up and we talked about the book, and she had some ideas for the book, and I'm trying to remember if she made an offer or if it was more like, not making an offer, but let me see the next edit. Like I'm having trouble remembering that. And so we ended up working on the manuscript for, I think it was like a year or two of doing more edits and more changes.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a lot, but I thought it was making the book better, so I was, happy to do it at that point. And then yeah, I think you know that it died on submission. What happened is that, and I was in grad school at this point, so at a certain point I was like I need to do something else too. I need a backup, because
Right.
other thing doesn't seem to be going my way as quickly as I want, so I'm gonna have to figure out something else. And so I went back to school for social work. And so I was in grad school, and my agent sent it to a certain number of people and was getting no's on it. Then, like, I'm sorry if this sounds dramatic, but I'll never forget. I knew exactly where I was. I was at my internship and I got an email from her, and she was basically like, "Oh, I'm like going to another agency and I'm not going to be doing as much fiction, and I can't think of anyone else to send this to." So it was like a Dear John letter.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
So first the book didn't sell, and then like fairly quickly after that, you lost your agent, basically.
Right. Well, I was, honestly, I was frustrated. I was thinking like, really, there's really no one else that might be interested in this after we've spent all this time working on it. So I don't know exactly what the situation was. And I wish now that I would have just called her and talked to her about it, but I think I was really hurt that it came through an email, So
Yeah.
I think that was like 2018 or so, 2017, 2018.
Yeah. So that's very frustrating. But I guess it sounds like at some point you had kind of made this pivot of like, okay, I'm going to start focusing on social work and I still have the writing dream, but I need this other thing to be, working on as well. So, I mean, what were your feelings like when you got that email from your agent? Were you kind of like, okay, maybe I'll just put writing on the back burner, or were you still like, no, I still really want this and this is just a setback?
I think that I did put it on the back burner for a little while. And I mean, it's pretty intense to be in grad school anyways. So
Yeah, yeah.
I think I did put it on the back burner, and I really didn't know what was going to happen with my writing. And it really felt devastating at the time. And it just felt like I've put so much effort into this and so much time. And like, I felt at that point like I had nothing to show for it, which now I look back, I don't think that's true at all. But yeah, at the time it was pretty disheartening. And so I took a little break from it, but I had this idea about kind of the premise of the writing retreat. And I thought, it could be kind of fun and cathartic to write a book that actually explores all the frustrations and difficulties of being an author. And so when I started working on that, I was very strict with myself. And I'm like, okay, pretend that this is never getting published. No one's ever going to see this. And let's just write the story for you and make this like the most fun book that you can possibly write.
And it worked because it is so much fun. But I think that's also good advice that, especially when you're writing a first draft, you're writing it. They say the first draft, you're writing the story for yourself. And then in the revisions in the second draft, that's when you're writing it for the readers. But in that first draft, you are, as much as possible, having fun with it. And I know writing isn't always fun, but you're writing something that you would have fun reading, and you're finding the joy in the process itself. So, yeah, I think that's really good advice. I know that for the speculative fiction one, it was like years and years of working on it and revising it. So then when you wrote the writing retreat, was there still like a really long process of revising, or did you feel like you were able to streamline that a little bit?
Yeah, it's interesting because going back into my records, I realized that I had written a very early iteration of the writing retreat, which was a very different book, but I had done NaNoWriMo about 10 years before the writing retreat was published. And so Alex was there and she had her issues with Ren, and Rosa was showing up in her dreams, and it took place in Montana. So it was like a very different book, and it was kind of sci-fi. I had kind of forgotten about that link because I set that aside, and then when I went back to the writing retreat, I remember I was still, yeah, I must have still been in my publishing job because I remember sitting outside and like the idea of setting at a writing retreat just like kind of happened upon me, and I was like, oh, like that would be really cool. So I'd had the idea for a while. And then the actual process of writing what turned out to be the final writing retreat version, I think that took much less time. So I think that took maybe 2 or 3 years.
I love that you're like, oh yeah, that took much less time, like 2 or 3 years. But I think that's good. This is what people listening to the podcast need to hear. I think it's just like, this is a very long process. This is a marathon, not a sprint. I do think often we feel like, oh, if we write a manuscript and we don't get an agent with it or it doesn't get published, that we have nothing to show for ourselves. But we are growing as writers. It's like you can't see it on the outside, but it's not for nothing.
Yeah, no, I think all of that like practice is really important. I had looked at one of your posts about like advice that you don't want to hear or something like that, but I really liked it. And yeah, I think sometimes writing the books is practice. Like you're learning how to write a novel and you're becoming better. Yeah.
Well, so okay, so you wrote the writing retreat, you worked on it for a couple of years, and then you felt like it was ready to query. Were you like gearing yourself up, like, okay, I'm going to go through this process again? Tell me about that.
Yes, yes. I was going to jump back into that into that pool. I sent again blind queries out to some people, and some like I had connections with, and actually the agent that I ended up going with, Alexandra Machinist, she's also an agent for my sister. It's funny, the query actually got lost in her spam folder. I included the first like 5 pages in the email, and there's some expletives in it. That was stressful and funny, but yeah. By this point, just living in New York and having a lot of writer friends, I had like some more connections, but I still was doing the same querying, emails and, first 5 pages and that sort of thing.
I don't know. Is it strange at all to have the same agent as your sister? And I should say, in case anyone lives under a rock and doesn't know, but your sister is Andrea Bartz, who is also a best-selling thriller author. And I guess this was one of my questions. So this is a two-part question: was it hard for you kind of emotionally that here you are struggling to publish and your sister, I think at this point, right, was already kind of successfully publishing? And then, is it kind of strange that you guys both have the same agent, or does it, I don't know. Yeah, talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think it's probably impossible to not compare yourself to other people in your field, especially if those people are siblings or friends. And so, yeah, I had multiple friends who had published several books at this point. I'm trying to remember if the agent, detaching from my first agent, if that happened around the time that my sister got her agent and her pub deal. I'm not sure, but it brought up a lot in different ways because I was, of course, very happy for her and very excited, and I loved the book, and I thought it was going to, do great. And at the same time, yeah, there were parts of me that were also jealous, envious, and, sad that again, it felt like this prize that I was just like trying so hard to get, and it felt so difficult.
Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting to me that, it's like you're both writers, and not only that, you're both writing the same genre. And I'm sure you can hold both of those feelings at the same time, like be super happy, but then also like be a little envious at the same time. And
I mean, I will say that Andy had always written too. Like as kids, sometimes we wrote things together, and she was writing her own little novels and books, as a kid. So, and became a journalist. So I wasn't really surprised when she decided to go into fiction. And I will also say that it's since been very helpful having someone close to me that can answer like any questions, any time of day. Like, is this normal? What should I do in this situation? So I'm actually finding it a strength, at this point.
yeah, yeah. Oh, that makes sense. So let's go back to you found your agent. You've got the writing retreat, and then what happened when you went on submission with that?
Yeah, so we went on submission pretty quick. I think I did one more edit with my agent and then we sent it out. And there was a couple editors who were interested, so I had phone calls with all of them and we just kind of talked about their vision of the book. And I decided to go with Emily Bestler because I love that I kind of got the feeling that some people wanted to like soften the book a bit.
Mm.
Like, oh, for book clubs, we're gonna need to like soften or, something along those lines. But Emily was just like, yes, let's do it. Like she loved the intensity of it. And so I appreciated that she seemed to really get it.
I think that's so interesting to hear about when you're lucky enough to have multiple people interested, and then, you have to make sure that their vision, either that it aligns with your vision or that you're like on board with, you're like, oh yeah, let's do that. So that's interesting that some people wanted to soften it. Although going back to your submission to your agent, it's interesting to know that it got put in the spam folder because maybe of all the expletives. So maybe for listeners, try to soften on the cuss words in the first few pages, I guess. I don't know. That's interesting.
That's a really good practical note, or maybe like star it out or something, or do something.
Oh, yeah, yeah. Okay, so then you had multiple people. You went with Emily Bestler. Yeah, and so then you had your book deal, and I guess I am curious to know what your debut experience was like. And I know that the writing retreat became an instant New York Times bestseller. So what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, that was incredibly unexpected. Like my agent called me and I was just completely blindsided by it. I wasn't expecting it. And I think I had kind of the most positive debut experience that you could have. Like I feel very lucky. My publicity team was amazing and yeah, for whatever reason, things just worked out well for the book, which doesn't happen and every book is different, but yeah, for the writing retreat, things just seemed to go really well and I was thrilled about it.
Maybe this is just my own personal opinion because I love books about the publishing industry, but it does feel like people are really hungry for books that kind of expose the underside of the publishing industry. And yeah. Well, did you have a book launch party, and was it anything like the book launch party that the writing retreat opens with?
Yeah, that's a great question. The book party that happens in the beginning of the writing retreat was actually based on a real book party that I went to at the Ace Hotel. My friend Jennifer Armstrong had a party there many years ago, and I just thought it was such like this cool kind of like fancy hip place. And then actually the last book events, there's also like a book party that happens at the end of the book, and that's also based on parties that I've been to in Greenpoint at Word Bookstore. So I liked kind of having those both as bookends. And for my book launch, yeah, so I was terrified of public speaking. So that was something that I had to kind of work through. And I was lucky enough there was like I don't know if it was a Signal chat. There was some kind of chat that I was lucky enough to stumble into of new authors and someone, you could like search for different terms and different conversations and stuff. And someone had mentioned that this woman, Erica Ackerman in LA, was really good at helping people with public speaking fears. So I reached out to her and worked with her. I really don't know what I would have done without her. Like the first time that I met with her, I couldn't even talk about public speaking without my throat like closing up.
Oh, wow.
Like it was a phobia. It was like a very intense fear. And luckily, she's an amazing somatic practitioner and therapist. And we did a lot of exercises and a lot of visualizations and a lot of like breath work and body work. And so by the time the launch came around, I was still like very nervous about it, but was able to get through it. And it's the fear is usually like at the very beginning and then goes away. I think having more practice too, it just feels very different. But yeah, I've heard from a lot of authors that they also have that fear. And I think it's something that we don't talk about enough. And we just expect authors to know how to do all these like publicity things that are probably not A lot of us are like bookish and quiet, and that's
Yeah, it is like, oh, you're spending years on your computer alone typing a book, and then now all of a sudden you've got to like get up in front of people and talk about it, and it's just a very different skill set. Well, I have two questions. One is, did you always have a fear of public speaking? And then at what point were you like, oh, I need to address this before, I actually need to get up in front of people and talk?
yeah. I've had it for a long time. I even remember being like in my publishing job having to do presentations at different points and like my throat again like closing up and being very, nervous and not being able to like follow along with what I was saying. Like I would just kind of panic,
Hmm.
and I would just struggle through it. And I did try to address it. I started, trying to figure out different ways of dealing with it because I knew, and in the back of my mind, that was always my reason for wanting to change it. Like, oh, if I'm an author, I'm going to have to be able to do this. So even like way before that ever happened, I tried Toastmasters. Have you heard of
I've
Toastmasters?
heard of it. I know it's like a speech. You learn how to give speeches. Is that what it is?
It was terrible. It was terrible. I think for some people it can really be helpful, but for me, they kind of like throw you into it the first time you go, and you have to get up and give like an extemporaneous 5-minute speech about
Oh,
like all these strangers. It was like it was horrible. It just made me more nervous. It like did not help me. I also remember I tried to take like some improv classes because I thought that would also help me become maybe a little more comfortable. And those are really fun, but I didn't go too far down that path. Yeah, working with Erica. I also think being a therapist has been really helpful just because I talk to people all the time.
yeah.
One of the things that Eric and I talked about a lot was like connecting with people and seeing interviews as like an opportunity to connect and like communicate and learn things and not about me like putting on a show in any way.
Mm. Yeah, and I guess with so many book events too, a lot of times it's like you're in conversation with someone. So yeah, you can look at it as less of like I'm performing and more of I'm just having a conversation and there happen to be some people listening to it. So the woman you worked with, did you just do that through Zoom? Because you said she was in LA.
Yeah, most of it was over Zoom. She spends some periods of time in New York, so I have been able to work with her in person, and I've continued to work with her on and off. I also had like some insomnia, and she was really helpful for that too. That we worked together on that, like nervous system regulation. And then I also reached out to her before this book came out, and I think there was a part of me that was a little ashamed that I still have these fears, that they haven't completely gone away, but I mean, she reminded me, she's like, yeah, this is only your second book. Like, maybe
Yeah,
10 books out, it might feel different, but like, it's still, it's not going to be perfect or easy necessarily.
yeah. The last session just came out, and do you feel like for your second book launch, was there anything that you learned or did differently from your first time? How was this launch?
It was good. Yeah, I don't know if I did anything super differently, but again, I got to speak with Kimberly McCrate, and she has the most like calming energy that you could imagine, and she's very funny too. So
Yeah,
it's just like a really nice event, and I think I was able to enjoy it a little bit more. I was still nervous before, but I was trying to lean into the joy of like seeing friends and family show up, and I mean it's almost like a wedding. It's like all these people from different areas or aspects of your life come together in one place to support you.
yeah, yeah. You're still working as a therapist, right?
Yes.
Yeah. And obviously, I mean, the last session you have a character who is a social worker, so I'm guessing you're drawing some things from your work there into your novel. But I guess I'm wondering how do you kind of balance the two different parts of your career?
I find that they complement each other quite well. As you mentioned before, writing is very solitary. And so I think I enjoy, having part of the day be for writing, working on the book, and then also part of the day being for sessions with clients. I usually see clients later in the day, afternoon or evenings, and I try to write in the mornings. And I think just, yeah, the therapy training, and which continues, you never stop learning as a therapist. But there were just things that I came across that I thought were so fascinating. And yeah, I think the writing retreat, I think that was really me trying to explore what it means to be a writer. And I think the last session is about me exploring what it means to be a social worker, And Thea's not a therapist necessarily in the last session, but she knows a lot about kind of clinical concepts and particularly with regards to relationships and dynamics of those sorts. I wanted to, I when I was training to be a couples therapist, I was learning all these things and I was like, this is so fascinating and like no one told me this.
And are you working on a new novel now?
I am, yes. Kind of slowly, I've started writing a bit, but I'm very excited about it. I'm calling it Succession Meets Donnie Darko.
Ooh.
Yeah, most of it takes place on a luxury yacht, and very, very strange things happen.
That's what I like about your books. I don't know if you've ever read Jennifer McMahon. Have you ever read any of her books? Oh, you should. She writes kind of these psychological suspense, but there's always some kind of supernatural thing going on where you're like, is it just in their head or is it supernatural? And then it's like, oh, it is supernatural. And so you're, I would say, not quite as far along the spectrum as her, but I do like that in your books, there's like, oh, there is something weird going on here. It's not just in their head. There is something weird. So yeah, I'm excited about whatever you come up with next. Well, I guess I have two more questions. My first is, what is something unexpected that happened to you on your writing or publishing journey? And it can be something good or something bad, or maybe one of each.
I think, yeah, there's like kind of two sides of one coin that's popping into my head with regards to like feedback from people. And I think I didn't know how amazing it would feel to have people connect with the book or books. And, people have reached out to me and shared things and shared how it's helped them in their own life or kind of a theme that I want to be a through line throughout my whole career is just the importance of self-compassion and
Hmm.
eradicating shame as much as possible. So it just feels amazing like when people get it and having just been a reader for so long, like I never really pictured what it would be like on the other side,
Yeah, yeah.
And then also I think the negative feedback is, it's not easy. It's definitely gotten easier over time, but that is also something that I think I found it more painful with the last book just because it was the first time and it's so funny because I do it too. Like I'll watch a TV show and be like, oh, I didn't like this and I didn't like that.
With the negative feedback, are you talking about reviews or do you like read your Goodreads reviews?
I really try not to read. Well, it kind of depends. Like Goodreads, I'm still like trying to figure out how I feel about it, to be honest with you, because I do want to take in like feedback from people and I do want to know like how people have been affected by my work, especially with the writing retreat. I did like go through and kind of look at things just to see if there were like themes or something that I'm missing. I've insisted on sensitivity readers for both of my books because I just think that there's a lot that, might be in my blind spots and things I want.
Hmm.
So I think for a similar reason, sometimes I do kind of check out what people are saying. But I also want to be conscious that Goodreads is not necessarily a place for authors. It's really for other readers, like sharing feedback. So I don't know. It's hard to kind of balance that sometimes.
Yeah, yeah. With the sensitivity readers, I'm curious, did you have things in mind where you're like, I want you to sensitivity read with this lens, or were you just kind of like, tell me my blind spots or if there's something here that I'm missing?
Yeah, I kept it pretty open. I mean, race, sexuality, and gender are things that, I wanted the sensitivity reader to keep in mind, as they were reading. And, characters of color that I've written, like again, I just want to be conscious of like anything that I might be overlooking.
Yeah. Okay. Well, so I have my last question, which is I always ask for a tip for the road. It can be a tip about writing or querying or just how to survive kind of the self-doubt and rejection that comes with this industry. So, what is a tip that you have?
My main tip, I think, would be to, and this is something I wish I could have told myself, my past selves, going through this process, would be to try to find as much joy in the process as you can. I think we can be very fixated on certain external goals, like getting the agent or getting the editor or getting published. And, in some ways that makes sense. But like, again, I'm so glad that you're doing this podcast. I mentioned that to you earlier, I think before we started. But I think it's really important that this process is normalized because I felt like kind of a failure throughout so much of it and certain, books not getting published and not getting to where I thought that like other people were getting to faster. And so I think if there's a way to just enjoy the work itself, I also think that productivity culture has a lot to do with this too. I really credit Adrienne Marie Brown's Pleasure Activism and Tricia Hersey's Rest is Resistance, those two books for really showing me that this is like capitalism. Like there's a reason why we're expected to just be these machines that are churning out work. So yeah, really focusing on the enjoyment of the process. And that's not to say that every time you sit down to write, you're going to be thrilled about it, but you know, maybe you will be. Maybe you're excited about like a certain part of the story you're writing, or maybe if you're not, you can do something, you know, go to your favorite cafe, get your favorite drink, and just make it a really nice like writing session. So that's what I wish that I'd known before.
Yeah. Yeah. I was talking to someone else who said that after they lost their agent, they were like, oh, there's kind of a freedom when you're just starting out or when, you don't have anyone expecting your next thing where you can just enjoy the process and be like, I can write whatever I want, however long it takes. And I wonder if now that, you are on this trajectory, is it like people are expecting you're going to write a thriller and they're, expecting it to come at a certain time. And so, I mean, hopefully you can still find the joy, but it's maybe a little bit more stressful.
It feels different. I don't know if it's more stressful. In some ways, it's less stressful because I know that the books will come out. It does feel a little different, but I think there's still ways to enjoy the process. And I guess the other piece of advice I would give people, if I can give another one,
Oh, sure. We'll take it.
my other piece of advice is write the book that you want to write and write the book that only you can write, and don't write to the market, and don't like concern yourself with what's happening in the market, because I've heard stories of people doing that a little bit more, and then they're not loving the book as much, or maybe at that point when they publish the book, the market has moved on to some other topic. Like you can't really time the market, I don't think. So I think it's most important to just write what really excites you and what you find yourself thinking about all the time. And I think that's really important too.
Yeah, because I mean, as we've been saying, these things take years. It can take years to write and revise your book, another, year or two of querying, another year or two of finally getting a book deal. And by that point, yeah, the market is totally different than when you first started writing. Yeah. Well, so are you happy writing suspenseful mashup thriller horror type stuff, or do you think you'll ever totally go in a different genre direction?
Yeah, for now, I'm really enjoying it. This next book is maybe a little bit more sci-fi, I guess I would say. I mean, I also would love to write a straight horror novel at some point. I think that would be really fun. I'm sure in the future, other genres might pull at me, maybe something historical or something like that. So yeah, I'm really just trying to stay connected to my intuition and see what feels like the next right thing to work on.
Love that. Well, thank you so, so, so much for being here. It's really been a pleasure. And like I said, I'm a fan. So I can't wait to see what you do next. And it was fun to hear the whole journey, which is obviously not over yet.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eva. I love this conversation.
A huge thanks to Julia for coming on the show. Be sure to check out her new book, The Last Session. The link is in the show notes. And also a big thanks to Helly Gomez, who was my first listener for this episode. The Long Road to Publishing is produced and edited by me, Eva Langston. And the intro and outro music comes from the artist Soundroll on Upbeat. You can find me online on Instagram, Blue Sky, and Substack with the handle Eva Langston. Even better, find my newsletter for writers at evalangston.substack.com. And feel free to send me an email. The podcast address is longroad.pub@gmail.com. Remember to rate, review, and subscribe to the show, and I'll be back soon with more stories about the long and winding path to publishing and more tips for the road.